This review is for a book that I acquired when I was very young in the second or more likely fifth hand bookshop, and it was published in 1959. It's by Kendall, of whom no one seems to have ever heard, and it's called The Minnipins. It has virtually no online presence. I have never met anyone else independently who ever read it. The only people I know who have read it, it's been this copy, and I have held on to this copy for decades. I'm glad I have, otherwise it's so anonymous a book I might start to suspect I'd imagined it, even though I'm virtually word perfect on it. Since it was published in 59, it's hard to get a handle on what sort of an audience it was aiming for, and that might be why it's sort of semi-unknown now. The introduction says for readers of 9 and over, and that including the really beautiful illustrations that you have, which are done by Eric Blegvad, such as the map at the front of the book and the tiny little illustrations that you get throughout the book and at the beginning of chapters. These are gorgeous illustrations, worth owning just for the illustrations. Because of this, one sort of assumes that you're looking at a children's book. It's not what you'd think of as a children's book these days, though. There are children in it because it starts in a village, but none of those children actually have any real presence. They're just part of the village. All of our main 5 characters are adults. And while they don't behave in terribly adulty ways, there's not any ever doubt of them being full adults in their village and having full lives of their own. The village is very fantasy medieval. There's no reason to be able to date it, but if you were going to date it, you're looking at kind of medieval, because you've got things like Crambo the basket maker, you've got a candle maker, you've got a basket maker, you've got a mayor, you've got fishing and small scale agriculture on which the village subsists. It's a beautifully devised and written village. Now the village itself is illustrated here, and it's called Slipper on the Water, because the history of the Minnipins, which is what they call themselves because no one else knows that they're there, is that they came to the valley fleeing some sort of terrible enemy who they call mushrooms. They got through the hills, a flood wiped out the mushrooms that were pursuing them, and then they travelled up the valley by water in small boats, and every time a significant event occurred, a small number of Minnipins stayed there to found a village. Slipper on the Water was founded because at that point in the journey, their leader's slipper fell off and floated in the water for a while. And that was clearly a sign you needed to found a village there. So you see, the mythology and the world building is kind of childlike, but at the same time, I can't help feeling that it's a more adult concepts book than you find in a lot of modern children's books. And for the time, in the 50s, children's books were often very much children's books. I still love reading children's books from the early years. I've got heaps of them. This one always felt a very interim book in terms of ages. So in this book, our main character is Muggles. She is one of the outliers in her village. In their village, they've got most villages incredibly conformist, which felt very real to me since I spent a certain amount of time in a small village. Your doors are all painted the same colour because there's only one colour for doors. The thatch is always scalped in a certain way because that's how you scalp thatch. You don't behave out of the ordinary, but in this village, they have 5 of them. The them weren't ordinary villagers. So, let's see. Oh yes, they also have a sort of upper class called the periods. The periods are the periods because one of their descendants built a balloon and flew over the hills and came back with remnants. And his children were named after certain mementos that he brought back from that village. But I'm on page 10 here. It was not only the periods that made Slip-on the Water different. There were 3 Minnipins in the village who were usually referred to by their neighbours as them. They were not considered respectable. They were a law among themselves. They lived alone instead of marrying and raising families as normal Minnipins did. Worst of all, they flaunted cloaks of such an outlandish hue that it was shaming to be seen talking to them. Furthermore, the thems didn't properly work at anything. Walter the Earl spent his time digging holes in the ground in his ridiculous search for hidden treasure. Curly Green was usually to be seen sitting on her stool in the corner of the marketplace, blobbing pictures onto stretched reed paper. And Gummy, well, Gummy was bone idle. But Gummy was also a poet of kinds, and he's the one that triggers the story by coming back to the village late after having seen fires on the mountains where no fires should be. And then there was Muggles. Muggles is our heroine. She would be horrified to be called a heroine at the beginning of the book, though. She couldn't exactly be called one of them, but she wasn't just an ordinary villager either. While it was true that she dutifully wore the Minnipin green cloak and brown weave dress, it cannot be denied that upon occasion she tied up her middle with a vivid orange sash. Orange sash. She was a candy maker and a museum maker, and everyone thinks of her as being rather simple. She's rather simple because she says what she thinks, and what she thinks isn't always what other people think she should think. And after many, many years of being told she's simple, she's come to accept it with a yes, I know. But then, after the fires on the mountain that Gummy sees, a whole heap of events end up in them and one other man from the village who objects to them being expelled, all being expelled up the river to live on their own outside the village, which is absolutely horrifying to everyone except Gummy, who's done it himself on occasion. And a lot of this book is kind of pastoral and unexciting, I suppose, in that what they're doing is they're trying to build a house and lay down food and prepare for winter when they're going to have to support themselves and cope with the notion of being thrown out of their village, which is more important to some than to others and for different reasons. And then the fires on the mountain come back and maybe someone is trying to get into their village. I don't know. I still find that it may be for years 9 and over, and I'm definitely over 9, but I think it's such an exciting book. It's like, I suppose I can see why adults wouldn't warm to it. If you don't like young adult or children's books, it might feel a bit young for you. But for anyone who likes an exciting story that really takes you out of everything that you know and just dumps you in a scenario, I think this one's brilliant. And it is so beautifully written. I would be very curious to see if anyone watching this review has actually read this book. One, I know, Bob, because I forced it on you and made you read it and you weren't enthusiastic. But like I said, the only people I know who've actually read this book are the ones who have read this copy, usually because I shoved it at them and made them read it. I adore it. It's still a comfort read for me. I do reread it every few years. I think I read it the year before last when I got COVID and could barely leave home. I can't wait to see if someone's heard of this one, actually. Let me know.